Okay, in today's lesson we're going to be looking at histograms. Histograms is a way to display information. It looks like a bar graph, very similar to a bar graph, and the difference is that the bars are all touching one another, but we'll look at that here in just a minute. But first let's look at how you take a set of information and you figure out the frequency. Histograms are about graphing the frequency that something happens. And so we have something called absolute frequency and relative frequency. First we're going to look at absolute frequency. So we have here's an example. 15 people were asked to state the number of hours they exercise in a 7-day period. The results of the survey are listed below. Make a frequency table and histogram to display the data. Okay, first of all, we're going to arrange the data on a frequency table. Now, if you look up here at the data is pretty scattered around. We don't have a whole lot of numbers that repeat with one another. And it looks like the lowest number looks like a 2. And the highest number in this looks like, do I see anything higher than 12? No, I think, 13. 13. So we know we have to go from 0 to 13. And because most of the numbers don't repeat after themselves, instead of making a table where we list every single number, now sometimes this is done if a lot of the numbers repeat, but since they don't, let's do a range. So the hours of exercise range from 2 to 13. So what we're going to do is we're going to break it up into 3-hour intervals. So we're going to break it up to 0 to 2, so 0 or 1 or 2 hours of exercise. Then we're going to go 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, 9, 10, and 11, 12, 13, and 14. Each one of them is a 3-hour span there. So now we literally take tally marks. As we go through the information here, you're going to make a tally mark. So we start with 8. 8 is in the 6 to 8, so I make a tally mark. 2, make a tally mark. 4, 3 to 5. 7.5 is in the 6 to 8. 10 is in the 9 to 10 range. 11 is in the 9 to 11 range. 5 is in the 3 to 5 range. 6 is in the 6 to 8 range. 8 is in the 6 to 8 range. 12 is in the 12 to 14. 11, 9 to 11. 9 is 9 to 11. 6.5. Now when you're making tally marks, if you don't know this, every fifth one you do go across. So we already have 4 marks on 6 to 8, and the fifth one you do this and you make bundles of 5. So there's our fifth one in that. And then 10.5 is 9 to 11. Again, I'm going to go across like that to make a bundle of 5. And then 13, which is down in the bottom. Now that we've taken a tally, the absolute frequency is just the number for each tally. So for 0 to 2, there was 1 person who exercised from 0 to 2 hours. There were 2 people who exercised from 3 to 5 hours, 5 for 6 to 8, 5, 9 to 11, and 2, 12 to 14. And this total should be 15 because they told us that 15 people were asked to take the survey. So the absolute frequency is literally counting the tally marks and just saying how many is it for each one of our ranges that we have here. So we can graph that. We can graph the absolute frequency. We're going to look at that in just a second. But first of all, what is the relative frequency? So the relative frequency is going to be a percent. It is calculated by dividing the absolute frequency, the number here, by the total number. It's a percentage. So since 1 person out of 15 exercised 0 to 2, 1 divided by 15 is rounded to 7%. 2 out of 15 exercised from 3 to 5 hours, so we go 2 divided by 15 and round it to the nearest percent, and it would be 13%. 5 out of 15 exercised 6 to 8 hours, and that is 33%. Of course, the next one is also going to be 33% because it's also 5. And we've already done 2 up here, so we know that the bottom one is 13%. So the relative frequency is the percentage of each category, how many in each category. The absolute frequency is the literal counting the number of people who did it. So you can look at it either way, and we're going to show a graph of each one. So if you're taking notes, in the first graph that you have below there, we're going to label hours on the bottom, and we're going to first make a absolute frequency. So we're going to put frequency on the y-axis. And since up here our absolute frequency ranged from 1 to 5, 5 was our highest number, then on our graph we don't need to go any higher than 5. I like to go 1 over, so I went up to 6 here on my y-axis and labeled it. Okay, sorry, I just had an interruption making my video, so I'm not exactly sure where I left off, but we were making our absolute frequency graph here. So we put the number of hours down on the x-axis, and we're going to graph the frequency, which was our tally marks, how many people actually exercised. Now, when you make the bar, it's going to look like a bar graph. From 0 to 2, there was 1, so we're going to make a bar graph, a bar, and color it, and we're going to fill in this entire region. Now, the difference between a frequency, a histogram, and a bar graph is when you make a bar graph, there will be spaces between the bars. When you make a histogram, they're going to be right next to each other with no space. So from 3 to 5 hours, we had 2. So notice there is no space here between the bars. They're going to touch each other. 6 to 8, there were 5. 9 to 11, there were 5, and 12 to 14, there were 13. So it's like making a bar graph, but the histogram, notice I used alternating colors. Since the bars are touching each other, it helps to have alternating colors. If this was all yellow, then you would not even be able to distinguish hardly between these two bars that are touching each other. So alternating colors is a good thing to use. The colors don't mean anything. They're just alternating so that since they're touching each other, you can distinguish them apart. So that is the absolute frequency graph, where you're just graphing literally the number of people that surveyed for each group of hours. To make the relative frequency table, this time it's based on percentages. So notice that we changed our y-axis to percentages, and the percentages range from 7 to 33%. So I want to make sure that when I'm figuring out how to label the numbers here, that I go up through at least 33%. So I chose to go by 5s up to 35% so that I can have all those numbers covered. Notice down here I still have the same thing. I have hours with the breakdown of that we decided on. So now we do the same thing, except instead of the 1, 2, 5, 5, 2, we are graphing the percentages. So 0 to 2 hours was 7%. Then we had 13%, 33%, 33%, and 13%. It looks a lot like the last one. Let me flip back here. You'll notice that the shape of it looks a lot like the last one, but it's just looking at percentages instead of exact numbers. So you can make a histogram either way, with the absolute frequency or the relative frequency, and you just have to kind of look at the information and see what they're asking you to do. And that is how you make a histogram. Good luck.